As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a special returning guest tonight. Jerry Robinson, founder of Follow the Money Daily, ftmdaily.com, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers. He's a Christian economist. He studies the markets. He's an expert in precious metals. He wrote the book Bankruptcy of Our Nation, and he's here with us today on Reluctant Preppers to talk to us about what's really going on and exposing a secret link between Saudi Arabia and 9/11. Jerry, thank you for returning to visit us again on Reluctant Preppers.
Oh, sure. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, in a recent podcast that you released, you discuss evidence that's been revealed in what's called the 28 pages that establishes a link between the Saudi royal family and the 9/11 hijackers. First of all, can you inform our audience a little bit about your background and why you're focused on this topic at all? And secondly, what are the 28 pages?
Sure. Yeah. So my background is an economist. I'm a trained economist, studied economics, and then have went on to do a lot of research, specifically in the currency markets and also in how geopolitics impacts economies. That's been kind of my background. I'm also very interested in the cross-section of theology and economics. I find a very compelling, interesting a subset of disciplines there to study. And so anyway, but beside that, the 28 pages is of interest to me for the same reason that Iran and its threat of a nuclear bomb is the topic of concern for people who watch Fox News, for example. You see, today we live in a country where people are concerned about radical Islam. They're upset that their president doesn't use the word radical Islam. And unfortunately, we have been hoodwinked by our corporate media to sidestep and avoid looking at the bastion of radical Islam, the very belly of the beast, so to speak, which is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has been given a pass in the mainstream press for a very long time. In fact, they have really ratcheted up their spending on PR here in the United States over the last several months. You know, so that Saudi Arabia has spent years and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, building an elaborate media empire that spans the globe. And what they're doing is they're distracting the West from the ongoing atrocities in Syria, from the ongoing atrocities in Yemen, and more recently from the 28 pages, which were just released, a suppressed section, by the way, of the 9/11 Commission report. And just recently, I had one of the authors of the 28 pages on our podcast, Senator Bob Graham, and but this was before the 28 pages were released. And I asked him, I said, "Now you wrote these pages. You know, you and your fellow congressmen wrote these pages, and senators wrote these pages, and you haven't been able to see them released now for 15 years, and they talk about the financing of 9/11. And he was, of course, very perturbed about the whole thing and urged Americans to contact the government to have these released. Well, they made their release. The 28 pages are now out. But what they show is a direct link between the Saudi Arabia government, the royal family itself, and the 9/11 hijackers, some of the 9/11 hijackers here in the United States. This is incontrovertible evidence. I mean, it's right here in black and white, but the media, has to do its job and actually report on these things. And unfortunately, because the Saudi government, and people can look up WikiLeaks, the Saudi cables, where they have more than 500,000 cables and other documents from the Saudi Reserve Ministry that contain secret communications from Saudi embassies around the world, and they're all right there on WikiLeaks. Mainstream media can go over there and dig through them and find all kinds of bombshells, but they don't. Instead, they want to talk about how Iran might one day have a nuclear weapon. Instead of saying that Saudi Arabia possibly was involved in financing 9/11, instead of actually saying, hey, let's follow these leads and actually find out where they go, Washington has been reluctant to do that, and the mainstream media, of course, has been complicit because mainstream media is for profit, right? So if you're a for-profit corporation and you're a news organization, you respect what? You respect cash. The truth is a casualty if money is going to be involved. And so there's clear evidence from WikiLeaks and other places that Saudi Arabia has strong-armed itself into a global media empire. One of the largest holders of Fox News, shareholders of Fox News, is a Saudi royal prince, Alawi bin Talal. So they have their hands in our media. They control what we see. When we talk about a corporate-controlled media, we're talking about foreign entities influencing what we see. And so because of this, they have our eye off the ball. They have us talking about, they have us all stark raving mad here in the United States about radical Islam. Everybody needs to be worried about radical Islam. And yet, the very birthplace of radical Islam, the very birthplace of it, Mecca, the very birthplace of Wahhabism, which is the same theology that drives ISIS, the same theology that drives Al-Qaeda, the people who actually finance these guys, right? They get a total pass in the media. There's 28 pages that show they were complicit in the 9/11 attack, and the American people are not being told these truths from the corporate media. So that's why I'm interested in it. And there were a lot of interesting coincidences, I guess you could say, during the release of the 28 pages. We can go into that if you'd like.
Yeah, you mentioned in your podcast, you mentioned an interesting look at the timeline of the 28 pages release compared to other recent events that are being publicized by the media. If you could kind of expose that correlation.
Very interesting. Yeah, we've been following this story for quite a long time. We've been calling for the release ourselves just because we felt that it was in the public interest. It just seemed like a public interest story that was being totally whitewashed and ignored. And so we gave platform to people like Senator Bob Graham, who said, hey, we want to get this information out. And we gave platform to others who were trying to get this information out to the public. Well, when the information came out, it came out in a hurry. We learned, and I guess I'll be dating this interview, but we are talking just after the release of the 28 pages. The 28 pages came out last week. And interestingly, the report that they would come out came out on Thursday. Now, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but I want to lay out the timeline. I find the timeline very interesting about how all of this happened. On Thursday, we learned from a real just bizarre news story that just came out on CNN Politics that said the 28 pages, which have been suppressed for 15 years and have been underneath lock and key, will be released possibly tomorrow. So literally within 24 hours, we could just release these 28 pages, the government says. So that was interesting. They were basically circumventing the 24-hour news cycle, basically trying to prevent too much speculation about it prior to the release, which was smart. But right around that same time as they were making the announcement that they would be releasing the 28 pages, you had the attack in Nice, France. Now, of course, Nice, France suffered an attack, according to the reports, by ISIS. And ISIS is a group of...
No. The attack in Nice was caused by a truck.
Or by a truck.
By a truck, right. Not by any particular ideology or group, but by a truck. That's what the headlines read. A truck slammed into a crowd. A truck attacked a crowd. Just correcting the... Anyway, speaking of whitewashing.
Well, actually, the in Nice, ISIS took credit for it. I mean, whether they were involved or not,
I was reflecting on the headlines and the whitewashing that happened in the media reporting of it, regardless of the actual claimed source.
I see. Okay. Tongue in cheek. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. but this was literally. I saw an article describing this. They showed excerpts from 3 or 4 headlines and articles, all of which put the active agent of that attack being the truck.
Yeah, that was interesting. Well, regardless, ISIS took credit, And what's interesting about that whole connection is again, people rarely link ISIS to Saudi Arabia, and they should in their mind. Imagine if I said, listen, I am a Baptist, right? Let's just assume, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say I'm a Baptist. I'm a Baptist, and I believe in everything that Baptists believe, right? And I believe in the entire Baptist doctrine. I just believe that Baptists need to really be Baptists, right? Now, you would say, well, gosh, I guess the guy's a Baptist, right? I mean, that's what you would assume. Well, that's exactly what we have with ISIS. ISIS says, we really believe Saudi Arabia's theology of Wahhabism. We really, really believe it to the point of really wanting to enact it as fully as possible. And if you look at the difference between ISIS and Saudi Arabia, it's very hard to find any except for the preferential treatment that Saudi Arabia receives. That's about the only difference. So the Nice attack, which was claimed by ISIS in the media in some places, was also very possibly, if you subscribe to the idea that ISIS is in any way, shape, or form controlled by other radical Islamic regimes in the region, then it's possible that they could have timed that during the 28 pages. Then the next day, and that's just simply and I admit that's complete theory, maybe completely wrong. The second thing is on Friday, the day within hours of the release of the 28 pages, a coup occurred in Turkey, which had all the appearances of being staged. Even people from the European Union, there was someone in the European Commission who made the comment that this looked completely staged. The list of people who were going to be arrested was already in place. Erdogan, who leads Turkey now, of course he has for a long time, he now is able to consolidate power, and he is able, right now he's actually banned all academics from leaving the country. He has he's purged the police departments, he's purged every single dean from every single university in the country. He is cracking down on, of course, the military. He is reinstating the death penalty, which will keep him out of the European Union. So there's been a lot of things that have developed here, and all of that happened within hours of the 28 pages being released. Therefore, it subverted, and if it was a staged coup, that means that it could have happened any particular day. It could have happened Saturday. It could have happened Monday. It just so happened that it hijacked the media news cycle within hours of the 28 pages being released. So there were some really interesting things. And then, of course, on Saturday, the day after the release of the 28 pages, there was a release from the AP on Iran and its secret plan to build a nuclear bomb, some sort of bombshell document, which turned out to really be nothing. But again, it turned out to be another PR release designed to whitewash this 28 pages. So it's not getting the press that it needs. And my basic thesis is this, that, if you want to sum it all down and say, well, what's the point? The point is that if you're concerned about radical Islam, right, then you need to be concerned about not just Iran. You need to be concerned about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not our ally. Iran is not our ally. I think we all admit that Iran is not our ally. We need to go ahead and take the next step and realize that Saudi Arabia is not really our ally. We do not have a shared vision. We do not have shared ideals. This is not a long-lasting, sustainable relationship. It's gonna go bad. It's gonna go south. And we already have 28 pages proving that the Saudi royal family played a direct role in helping some of the 9/11 hijackers. And that needs to be out there.
There's been questions for years from well-meaning Americans on how is it that that so many areas that seem to be are not our allies but seem to be more credible threats to us get a free pass in the media. I hadn't heard this one, that the media is actually significantly owned by the same factions. But isn't it go deeper than that? I mean, don't the Bush and how many presidential families have long and deep relationships with the Saudi royal family?
Oh, many. I mean, going back for quite a while, but especially the Bushes. Oh, especially the Bushes. There's a book that is really mind-blowing. I mean, it's called The House of Bush, The House of Saud, and it's a really good read. It's a little dated, but it goes back and it talks about that relationship that exists between those two families, and it's just simply astonishing. I mean, even in the wake of the 2001 attack, the 9/11 attack, you had people like White House advisor Richard Clarke, who admitted in the New York Times that he personally, or that top White House officials personally approved the evacuation of dozens of influential Saudis, including relatives of Osama bin Laden, from the United States in the days just after the 9/11 attack.
Right, when all of their flights were grounded.
When flights were still grounded, you had the top White House officials personally approving the evacuation of influential Saudis because and according to Richard Clarke, who ran the White House crisis team during that time, the FBI had assured him that the Saudis that were leaving were not linked to terrorism, right? So the FBI said, "Oh yeah, the bin Laden," and so they couldn't provide us any information. Like the family of bin Laden could not possibly provide us any valuable intel. But those guys in Guantanamo, who we've had over a barrel now for 15 years, who have no information, they belong down there on the rock. But bin Laden's family, they probably have no information. Let's scuttle them out of here. How bizarre is that? And why aren't the media asking these kinds of questions? And why is it 15 years later that this information is coming out now that we are dulled to war? And where are the people who were so excited about Benghazi? Remember Benghazi? We need to get to the bottom of Benghazi. Well, let's get to the bottom of who financed 9/11 first, right? So I want the Benghazi angst. Somehow, if the Republican Party can figure out how to pin this on Hillary Clinton, then maybe the lamestream media like Fox News might get around to reporting on this information. Maybe we have to make it all about Hillary. If we can pin it on her, then perhaps it'll actually matter to somebody. But until then, I guess nobody really cares.
This is another bizarre thing that puts people into a real state of skepticism. Is self-preservation is a natural instinct on ordinary people's parts and on nations, and yet it seems just baffling to many that both our government and our media seem to be conspired on the side of trying to convince us all to look the other way in the face of credible threats. And we've had some people say, well, it's because those threats are just false flags, they're not really credible. But others have said, no, it's because there are mixed motives here. This is not simply what's good for our country, what's good for our hearth and home and the lives of our people, but that there are, as you mentioned, these dollar motivations that are mixing the motivations here. And your study of the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar, all aspects of that, what connections can you make here as far as, I mean, after all, is this a simple thing as good business? If it's about the oil business, was that the core of the relationship between the Bushes and the Sauds, was just that they were all in the oil business together, or is there something else going on here?
It's good business, and it's the blood of your children, and that's how it works in Washington. So basically, it's the poor of this country going over to fight the poor of that country. And then, of course, the rich using the propaganda of the media to get the middle class to be angry at foreign nations, to be angry at the poor. I mean, this is how the whole thing has been spinning for so long. The way it works is that the rich and powerful, of course, control the megaphones. I mean, that's the first thing that they want. If you're rich, you want a megaphone. I mean, especially if you have something to say, or if you have an incentive to have power, which everybody does if they have money. And so whenever you take a look at what has happened, you have a media that is completely for profit. Most of the time, they are publicly traded companies, meaning that their profit maximization is not an option. It's a mandate legally. They have to maximize profit. And so their goal is not really thinking about you and bringing you the truth and, looking out for you the way they always say, but instead it's about taking care of their advertisers and making sure that they keep open access to the people that they want to have access to. So that's exactly what Saudi Arabia does. If you look in the WikiLeaks Saudi cable release, you'll find that they have roughed up places like the Financial Times and like the BBC and other outlets where they have roughed them up and said, you are not going to run this story or else we're going to do this. You also see Saudi Arabia actually blessing media outlets when they do their bidding and there's examples of this in the Saudi cables from the WikiLeaks, where the Saudi royal family would actually write a check to a particular media outlet and buy thousands of subscriptions artificially just to keep them afloat, so to speak. And so that's exactly how this works. And so the media is out there working as a for-profit, not in your favor, not looking out for you, but instead working for profit maximization as they're legally bound to. And they're brokering deals with people who have lots of power. And those people in power do not want you looking at them. They want you looking at other people. They want you looking at poor people. And poor people are perfect objects of their wrath because it gets people not looking at the rich. For so long, we've been sold the bill of goods that the rich, who are so kind at heart, will trickle down money to you if you just lower their taxes. And slowly what's happening is you have this public waking up to this fact that, wait just a minute, what a con job that was. You told me to give tax breaks to the rich because they were going to give back to me. And what you see is actually exactly the opposite. More income inequality than ever before. So you have this outraged and confused mass of people who don't understand why what they were sold is not turning out the way that it should. And what you have to blame for that is you have a corrupt media that will not report on the facts. They will always spin whatever they need to spin. Let's even go to another golden calf and talk about, just real briefly, climate change, right? Climate change. This year, the hottest year on record, but that was only beat last year, which was the previous hottest year on record, except the year before that, which was the hottest year on record. There was a story put out by Bloomberg just a few days ago that said if climate change is adopted and it's actually recognized, that the fossil fuel industry and other industries that are related will stand to lose $33 trillion. $33 trillion. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a damn good incentive. $33 trillion. That might change my mind on climate change, right? Now, I don't have an opinion on climate change because I'm not a scientist and I don't pretend to know things that I don't know. But I will tell you this, that $33 trillion is a pretty darn good incentive to say there's no such thing.
I used to work with a group of people who included one immigrant from the Middle East, and he said that in the old days in the Middle East, all you had to do to have a coup was you had one faction just take over the palace and the radio station, and overnight you had a new government. He said, because that's all you need. You need the palace and the radio station. As you look at the global situation here in the whether it's the White House and the media, has that much changed from the old days to now? If you take over the palace and the radio station, can you move and bend the minds and the wills of the people to basically look where you want them to look and not look where they should be concerned about?
Yeah, sure. And think about for a minute the families of 9/11. I mean, just imagine, and I don't even want to imagine, but imagine you're a family who suffered from 9/11. Maybe you had a family member who died or perished in the attack. Well, now you have 28 pages showing you that Saudi Arabia was involved, and yet you only have the ability to sue Iran. Isn't that crazy? Talk about crazy whitewash. U.S. District Judge George Daniels from New York, he's a Manhattan district judge, got the opportunity to rule on both of these cases. Back in March, he issued a default judgment saying that Iran had to pay $7.5 billion to the estates and families of people who died in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. They even had to pay $3 billion to insurers who had property damage. So Iran was ordered to pay $10.5 billion to the September 11th families. Iran. I mean, not Iraq, right, who we were told was involved initially, and then we were told they weren't. Or not Afghanistan, right? Not Saudi Arabia, Iran. Iran has, and why does Iran have to pay $10.5 billion for 9/11? according to U.S. Judge George Daniels, because they didn't prove that they didn't do it. That is the honest truth. Bloomberg, March 9th, 2016, Iran told to pay $10.5 billion to September 11th kin insurers. But just a little bit later, that same judge, Manhattan District Judge George Daniels, states that Saudi Arabia cannot be sued. And therefore 9/11 victims cannot sue them because they enjoy sovereign immunity because they are a legal entity, or they're a legal nation. So you even have the same exact judge saying that Iran, who no one in their right mind thinks Iran had anything to do with 9/11, they're the ones who have to pay $10.5 billion. And yet the same judge, even though there's 28 pages linking them, says Saudi Arabia cannot be sued. So there's something very, very wrong with this picture, and it's the petrodollar system. It's the, and this is the ugly truth that nobody wants to talk about, because when you lay down your life for your country, you want to think that you're actually spreading democracy. You actually want to think that you're spreading forth ideals that someone somewhere believes in. But in reality, and it's so hard to understand and it's so hard to process, it's just tough. But you just have to swallow it, and you have to say, just like I move according to my own self-interest, I won't be a fool and assume that others don't. The government moves according to its own self-interest, and its own self-interest is to dominate as much as possible and to maintain its currency status, which is the global reserve status that it enjoys. We live in a really weird time because China is the second largest economy. In 1820, it was the largest. But now it's the second largest. And if you look at China and you see where it is now, you think to yourself, how in the world can China be the second largest economy in the world? And yet their currency is held by hardly anyone. You see, the U.S. has been very successful in suppressing the usage of other currencies for a long time, and that has bought us what some people have called the exorbitant privilege. But that exorbitant privilege is right now breaking down before our eyes. And that's why we encourage people to be prepared to take action. So it's about not just seeing all of this writing on the wall, seeing the 28 pages, seeing the rise of China, seeing the inevitable collapse of the American empire. But on top of that, not just being angry about it, right? Not just being upset about it and confused about it, but actually taking action from it. So understanding it, processing it, and then saying, okay, what am I going to do? Well, here's a good thing to do. Take care of your family, right? Take care of your family. Get your house in order. Get your finances in order. Do you have a will? Do you have guardianship for your kids if something were to ever happen to you? Do you have life insurance, right? Do you have gold and silver? Do you have a retirement plan? I mean, all of these things, believe me, if you spend your time sitting around worrying about, the people on TV, trust me, those people are probably going to be okay. They've got a financial plan in place. They've got money. Do you? Do you have a plan? So I always urge people who are upset, concerned, worried, outraged, whatever the case might be, I understand and I feel your pain, but let's prepare. Let's be prepared. Let's use wisdom and apply this knowledge, not just have it.
We've had a variety of guests on our channel that have made claims about falseness from official government sources of information, whether it's government economic statistics, etc. As you point out now, false redirection or misdirection about who the true threats are to get people not looking at people in power. And also it made claims about not trusting corporate media and mainstream media. More and more of these dots are forming a line that all points to the direction. It's a chilling revelation to really, as you mentioned, get your head around and finally realize that all that you came to believe as a youth about you could trust your government, you could trust the media to tell you the truth. If you really need to be much more wary and cautious about where you get your information from, what do you recommend as more credible sources of information? If you can't trust give blanket sanction to what you hear on the mainstream media or from government sources?
Well, I think the first step is to try to avoid for-profit media. I mean, you can't avoid it. It's always there. But I would say that, look for good independent media sources who are trying to really sort out what's going on, who are actually thinking without all of the pressures of an editorial board that oftentimes, is really more focused upon the balance sheet than they are about, telling the truth to the people. I mean, we're dealing with very dangerous times right now. So because of that, it's important that we get truth and that we get, real meaningful stuff. But if you turn on television now, you're going to see stories about things like, indiscretions by Bill Clinton back, many years ago. You're going to see stories on TV, about other random things that just don't really have any direct impact upon what we're facing right now, which indicates completely that their eye is not on the ball. So you need to be looking for independent media outlets, I would say. Also, just use common sense. I mean, if you're upset about radical Islam, right? If that's one thing you're worried about, I mean, there's a lot of people who write into our podcast, and they'll always be talking about how Obama will never say or radical Islam. Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, what about Saudi Arabia? I mean, how come we don't hear anything about them from the news channels that don't like Obama? They don't talk about it either. So everybody's mad about radical Islam. They're just completely ignoring its source. And this is what's so bizarre. And the reason why it's occurring is because, again, what we've already said. So use common sense. If you're worried about radical Islam, and 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi, and ISIS is Wahhabist, and Al-Qaeda is Wahhabist, which is the same exact sect of Islam that Saudi Arabia espouses from its state sanctioned regime, then maybe you need to use common sense on that. And maybe not wait for the mainstream media to get around to explaining it to you. If you're worried about radical Islam, worry about the belly of the beast. That's Saudi Arabia. Have your eye on it and realize that it enjoys a very unique, special status, just like Israel here in the United States. And whenever that breaks down, that's going to really destabilize the Middle East order. It's going to destabilize our currency. It's going to destabilize our economy. I don't want to make any predictions about what will happen, but I think it will be negative. I think you'll want to own gold in a case like that. There's a couple of things that could happen that you need to be looking for. One is Saudi Arabia could, again, just suddenly up and decide to end our relationship by maybe embracing another country, or maybe diversifying how it sells its oil. Instead of using dollars, maybe they would use a basket. Another thing to watch for is a China announcement that they're going to back the yuan with gold. It's a very strange time right now, again, as I mentioned, with China being the second largest economy, but very few people holding their currency. That will change. That can't last forever. And if they began to back their currency with gold, they could get a tremendous amount of demand. That would be a very smart move. And that would be something I could see them doing. So those are the kinds of things, to be watching for, I think, if you're really concerned about a breakdown. Things like Turkey are very concerning to us, but they're not going to have a direct impact on us immediately. Saudi Arabia will, China will, Turkey would have an indirect impact on us. It's very concerning what's happening there as well. It looks a lot like the consolidation of power that happened in Germany in the 1930s.
Well, Jerry, this is going to be a story that continues to evolve, and none of us is going to know until it breaks much bigger than this. But as you point out, it's prudent and responsible for us to take positions to reduce risk of our families. If people want to get more insight that you provide on an ongoing basis, where can they find you online?
Yeah, they can go to followthemoney.com, followthemoney.com. They'll find all kinds of resources there. And they can also sign up for our weekly podcast, get that delivered to their inbox every week. We interview fascinating people, Steve Forbes, Robert Kiyosaki, as I mentioned, Senator Bob Graham. We love to interview, great minds and pick their brains. So it's always a good time on the podcast. But followthemoney.com is where to find us. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, I want to thank you for what you do.
Absolutely, Jerry, and thank you for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you.